When the world grows silent, the loudest voice begins to speak. Not the sirens outside, not the opinions pouring in from your feed, not the endless to-do list echoing in your brain. No, it's the sound of your own soul knocking from the inside, asking, "Are you still there?" It's a voice most of us haven't truly heard in years, maybe even decades, muffled beneath noise we once called life. At first, the quiet feels strange, like walking into a room where everyone has just left. The furniture is still in place, the lights still on. But something essential is missing. It's just you now, not the version that attends meetings, smiles at parties, or shares filtered glimpses on screens, but the raw, pulsing presence of your actual self, uncloaked and unperformed. It's here, in this bare silence, that the first tremors start. You begin to notice things, how tired you are without knowing why, how the joy you used to feel has dulled to maintenance, how connection has quietly morphed into obligation. These realizations don't arrive with a bang, but with a subtle ache. They seep in, like dampness into floorboards. You might try to name it. Maybe it's burnout, maybe it's just the weather, or hormones, or a passing phase. But deep inside, a quieter knowing surfaces. This isn't just exhaustion, it's disconnection. From yourself, from truth, from the version of you that existed before applause and performance became your compass. You once moved through life with instinct. You laughed without asking if it was appropriate. You cried when it hurt. You paused when you needed to. But slowly, without even noticing, you began editing your own being. You learned which parts to mute, which desires to delay, which truths to soften, to make others more comfortable. And what did you replace them with? Goals, productivity, predictability, a constant hum of doing, proving, fixing. You became so good at being useful that you forgot how to simply be. Stillness became suspicious, quiet became empty, and rest felt like failure. So you stayed busy. You filled your hours with action, your mind with distractions, your heart with logic. You crafted an identity from what others needed you to be. The caretaker, the achiever, the peacekeeper, the one who doesn't complain, the one who always has it together. But even the most polished performance eventually cracks. Maybe it happened to you one night, lying awake for no clear reason, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers. Maybe it showed up in the middle of a conversation, where your voice trembled without warning, betraying the weight beneath your words. Or maybe it hit you during a simple task, folding laundry, washing dishes, when you suddenly felt a wave of nothingness sweep through your chest. That nothingness is not empty. It is your truth asking to be felt. It's the grief you never had time for, the anger you silenced, the loneliness you covered with busyness, the desires you buried so deeply you forgot they were ever yours. And now, without warning, they rise. Not to punish you, but to reunite you with yourself. You may feel tempted to run again, to grab your phone, call someone, rearrange the furniture, make plans, make noise. But what if this is the moment you don't? What if instead you stayed with the awkwardness, the aching, the silence? What if you let the silence stretch, not as an enemy to be endured, but as a mirror held gently to your face? You might begin to see not just what's missing, but what's always been there, waiting. The version of you who never needed to be perfect. The version who danced before they were taught rhythm, who created before they were taught worth, who spoke before they were taught shame. They are not gone, only quieted. And in this very silence, this raw, exposed quiet, you have the rarest opportunity to remember, to come home to a self that never asked you to perform, only to feel. This is not the end of your story. It is the pause that rewrites it. Because when the noise falls away and the masks dissolve, what's left is not a broken you, but the truest one. So stay, not forever, just long enough to remember your own name beneath the noise. What if silence wasn't something to escape, but something to explore? We often treat stillness like a hallway we rush through, not a room to dwell in. A pause we tolerate until the next thing begins. But what if the discomfort we feel in silence isn't a flaw, but a compass? What if the very thing we keep avoiding is exactly where we're supposed to go? This is where a different lens is needed, one that sees solitude not as punishment, but as power, not as a vacuum, but as an invitation. And no one articulated this more sharply than philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. For Schopenhauer, solitude wasn't something to survive. It was a sign of spiritual strength. He believed that only those who were truly whole could stand to be alone. Because to sit quietly with yourself, without entertainment, distraction, or validation, means you are enough without accessories. This idea stands in stark contrast to what the modern world teaches us. We live in an age that equates value with visibility. You're told that if no one sees it, it doesn't count. If it's not posted, it didn't happen. But Schopenhauer flipped that entirely. He believed the more inner life you had, the less dependent you were on outer noise. In solitude, he said, we return to our center. We no longer orbit around the expectations of others. We stop twisting ourselves into acceptable shapes just to be loved. We begin to ask a question that terrifies most. Who am I when no one is watching? At first, the answer may not come easily. You may uncover silence that feels cold. You may meet shadows you've long buried, regrets you never voiced, truths you were too afraid to admit. But those aren't signs you're failing. They're signs that you're finally listening. And what's waiting beneath the noise might not be perfection, but it will be real. Maybe that's the secret. Healing doesn't always come in bright lights and breakthroughs. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet understanding, a gentle awareness that you don't need to keep performing to belong. That realization doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly, one quiet hour at a time. You may begin to notice that you're no longer afraid of your own company, that you can spend an afternoon alone without needing to explain it. That joy starts to feel less like a chase and more like a state you return to when you stop running. And the more you inhabit this quiet space, the more you start to see what's been there all along. Creativity, intuition, curiosity, softness, all the parts of you that were drowned out by the need to be efficient, to be liked, to be productive. Now they begin to return. You may start writing again, not for praise, but because you have something to say.
If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support.
You may cook just for yourself, relishing each slow stir. You may cry without guilt, laugh without permission, rest without shame. This is the slow reintroduction to self. The moment when your own inner world becomes not a prison, but a sanctuary. Solitude becomes something else entirely, not isolation, but intimacy. You begin to realize that you were never meant to disappear into others. That love doesn't require self-erasure. That showing up for your life isn't about being everything to everyone. It's about being fully here for you. This shift is not loud. It won't come with applause. But it will come with peace. The kind that doesn't depend on anything outside you. And so the question changes. It's no longer, how do I avoid being alone? But what beauty can I find here? Because once you start seeing the richness within you, you stop begging the world to fill your cracks. You stop chasing validation like oxygen. You stop outsourcing your worth to strangers. And that is freedom. Not a freedom given to you, but one you reclaim. So, the next time you find yourself in the quiet, don't rush to escape. Don't fill the space. Just stay. Stay long enough to hear the whisper beneath the noise. Stay long enough to meet the version of you that's been patiently waiting, not to be improved, but to be remembered. Stay until you realize that silence was never empty. It was full of you all along. We wear many faces to feel safe, but silence peels them away one by one. In the loud dance of daily life, we become performers without realizing. We adapt, please, comply. We play roles that make sense in the moment. The helpful one, the strong one, the always fine one. But these masks, though they've protected us, were never built to last in stillness. When the crowd disappears and the noise fades, something raw begins to rise. The identity we've crafted, the one that thrives in social performance, starts to fracture. Because when no one is watching, the performance ends. And what surfaces then is real. It's not always graceful. Often, what emerges is the part of you you've tried hardest to bury. The anxious inner child who never got comforted. The dreamer you silenced to be practical. The anger you swallowed to stay loved. All those pieces you couldn't afford to carry in your polished world now return, asking to be seen. At first, you might feel overwhelmed. This flood of old feelings doesn't come with instructions. There's grief that doesn't have a clear cause, longing without a name, a tiredness that sleep won't fix. You begin to realize this isn't just about being alone. It's about being confronted with the backlog of your own emotional history. And that hurts. Not because you're broken, but because you've been so busy surviving, you never got the chance to process. You thought productivity would save you. You believed if you just worked harder, became better, looked happier, the ache would shrink. But it didn't. It only grew quieter, deeper, sharper, until the silence gave it space to speak. And now, it's speaking. Not to blame you, but to bring you back. This is the paradox of healing. It often looks like falling apart, like crying for no reason, like losing motivation, like forgetting who you thought you were. But underneath that collapse is a soft rebuilding, a reordering of truth. You begin to see that being fine was never the goal, that always being strong left no room for tenderness, that in trying to be everything, you lost your own center. So you start to let go, not all at once. Healing isn't linear, it moves in spirals. You revisit old wounds, but from wiser places. You learn to hold your feelings without becoming them. You start giving your inner child the love no one gave them. You let the tears come, not as weakness, but as release. You relearn how to feel. You remember what it's like to just be sad without needing to fix it, to be joyful without earning it, to feel restless without interpreting it as failure. Emotions stop being threats. They become visitors, each one carrying a message. And in that process, your identity begins to shift, not into something new, but something more whole. You realize you're not just the achiever, not just the caretaker, not just the funny one. You are all of it, the messy, the brilliant, the unsure, the curious. You are a mosaic of contradictions, and that is not a flaw. That is humanity. For the first time, you may stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to show me?" And that is the moment things begin to change, not outside, but inside. You become more patient with your pain. You stop rushing to the next distraction. You hold space for the slow answers. You trust the process, even when it doesn't look like progress. And in doing so, you begin to rebuild not a life that looks perfect, but a life that feels true. A life that isn't driven by proving, but by presence. A life that honors every version of you, especially the ones you've hidden. And perhaps that is the deepest form of healing. Not erasing your past, but integrating it. Not denying your wounds, but turning them into wisdom. Because what once hurt now humbles you. What once broke you now grounds you. And what once scared you now leads you home. There comes a point where forcing no longer feels brave. It just feels exhausting. At first, we call it resilience. The ability to keep pushing, to carry on through fatigue, to insist on control when everything begins to crumble. We wear our tenacity like a badge. "I never gave up," we whisper to ourselves, teeth clenched. But what if the real strength lies not in holding on, but in knowing when to let go? We often mistake surrender for weakness, as if loosening our grip means we've failed. But there is a certain wisdom in recognizing that not everything is ours to fix. That some doors close, not to punish us, but to redirect us. That sometimes life isn't falling apart, it's falling into place, just not in the way we imagined. There's a quiet truth hidden in the spaces where things didn't go your way. The job you lost, the person who left, the dream that slipped through your fingers despite your best effort. At first, it may feel like a personal betrayal, as if the universe conspired against your vision. But in time, if you allow yourself to soften, to sit in the wreckage without rushing to rebuild, you'll notice something surprising. You're still here. Not as the version you were before, perhaps, but here nonetheless. Breathing, observing, feeling, changing. And maybe that's the hidden gift in all this. That even when the path collapses, the traveler does not. That even when plans disintegrate, purpose remains. Maybe it was never about reaching the summit, but discovering who you become as the mountain shifts. There's a term in Japanese aesthetics called Yūgen, a profound, subtle awareness of the universe that evokes emotional depth and mystery. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's the hush between moments, the fog on a quiet morning, the ache of something unnameable that stirs your soul. Yūgen teaches us to find beauty not in perfection, but in incompletion, not in clarity, but in mystery. And in many ways, this is what life asks of us when things no longer make sense, to stop demanding logic and start cultivating awe. It's in the moment you stop forcing a timeline that peace returns. The second you stop asking, why hasn't it happened yet? And instead whisper, maybe this pause is part of it. It's in the breath you take when you realize your worth isn't tied to your progress, that your value didn't vanish just because your plans did, that slowing down isn't the same as giving up. It's often how we catch up to ourselves. You begin to see your struggle through softer eyes. You remember that the strongest trees grow slowly, that the deepest rivers move quietly, that healing doesn't always roar, it often hums. And so, you begin to trust again, not blindly, but deeply. Not in outcomes, but in the unfolding. You stop needing to prove your timeline. You stop comparing your path to others. You stop editing your story to make it more palatable for the outside world. And in doing so, you begin to live from the inside out. You allow yourself to rest, to grieve the life that could have been without shame, to bless the one that is without condition, to look around at your not-so-perfect reality and find within it something astonishing: presence. You may begin to notice the small things you missed when you were sprinting: the sound of wind against the windows, the way sunlight moves across your floor, the quiet rhythm of your own breath as it steadies. These are not just background details, they are proof of your aliveness. And with that awareness comes a shift. You begin to stop chasing and start listening. You listen to your own body's cues instead of overriding them. You listen to your instincts before they become crises. You listen to your heart not as a liability, but as a compass. And what that voice may tell you is this: you are allowed to change course. You are allowed to release what once felt essential. You are allowed to not know. In fact, uncertainty might be the door through which your next chapter walks. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. Because when you stop forcing your life into a script that no longer fits, you make space for something truer to arrive. Not immediately, not cleanly, but eventually, in the way all living things unfold, in their own rhythm, in their own season. So perhaps the greatest wisdom isn't in always knowing what to do next. It's in being present for what is now. And from that place, humble, raw, honest, you don't rebuild the old life. You grow something new, not from pressure, but from peace. 提示